Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Janine and I work for Wardell Armstrong in the HR team at the head office in Stoke-on-Trent. Today I'm going to be doing a presentation along with my colleague and principal ecologist Mike Proctor. I'm going to start explaining a little bit about who we are, what we do, some of the benefits of working for us, and then finish off with a little bit of recruitment and the process for us. And then I'm going to pass you over to Mike, who's going to give you some information about ecology, all the fancy bits of working as an ecologist for Wardell Armstrong. And then at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask us any questions. So first of all, who we are. So we are a multidisciplinary environmental engineering and mining consultancy. We were set up by mining engineer William Armstrong in 1837, so we've been going for quite some time now. We've got about 500 staff now, and we're probably classed as a medium-sized consultancy. We're UK-owned, limited liability partnership, and we have no external stakeholders, no big slow parent company. We're owned by our directors who work at the heart of the business. We now have 13 offices across the UK. We have 2 overseas in Moscow and Almaty, and our head office in Stoke-on-Trent, which is the largest of all the offices, probably has about over half the total number of staff there. We have all our services from that office, including our finance teams, admin, HR, and business development. I say we're now 13 offices because we've recently, we were 12 and we've recently acquired the business and assets of Archaeological Solutions. That's in Bury St Edmunds, which now makes Wardell Armstrong one of the UK's largest suppliers of archaeological services. So as mentioned, we are multidisciplinary and we offer a wide range of services which are relevant to bachelor degrees in hopefully what you're studying and people that are on the presentation today. So environmental science, geology, biology, geography. And ecology, of course. So although these subject areas are what we look for in degrees, we do have specialist areas within the business which require you to go on to then do a master's degree, a postgraduate degree. So I'm going to run through now all the sort of services that we offer. So some of them are going to be relevant, some of them maybe not as much, but it's basically kind of an A to Z list really in a way. So acoustics and air quality. Our acoustics teams cover environmental and construction noise, noise at work, building acoustics and entertainment venues. This picture here is a local project that our heritage, ecology, noise and planning teams were all involved in. It's the 232-bed student housing scheme in Newcastle-under-Lyme. Our archaeology and heritage services are based across 5 of our Wardell Armstrong offices, and our post-ex hub in Carlisle is home to our purpose-built facility which provides finds analysis and post-excavation analysis. And as I said earlier, we now recently acquired the business and assets of Archaeological Solutions. Our expert team of civil and structural engineers work on a range of different projects, from wind turbine foundations to residential housing, multi-storey developments and educational facilities. You may all recognise this one here, this picture. It's the Keele University student accommodation, which in 2016 Wardell Armstrong were commissioned to provide pre and post tender services for, covering site investigation, foundation, superstructure, roads and drainage design. Ecology is obviously, I'm going to leave Mike to discuss that with you. energy and climate. So mitigating and adapting to climate change are key challenges of the 21st century, as you all should know. Our teams are highly experienced in developing suitable solutions to address and assess the impacts of climate change. This picture here is the renewable energy park to be located at Keele University. In 2019, Wardell Armstrong obtained a landmark planning permission for this energy park, which will form a key component of the university's Smart Energy Network demonstrator project, and will see the campus transformed into Europe's only at-scale low-carbon energy technology testbed. We cover environmental and impact assessment services for a range of development types, including residential, retail, storage and distribution, renewable energy, waste, utilities and minerals. We are also members of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, demonstrating our commitment to excellence in EIA services. Ground engineering, so the geologists here. So we have teams of chartered geologists, engineers and environmental scientists across most of our UK offices, and they undertake a range of contaminated land and geotechnical projects with residential development, infrastructure and industrial sectors. Some of our clients include National Grid, HS2, Network Rail, Bloor Homes and Staffs County Council. So hydrology and hydrogeology, our water team, they provide expertise to a broad range of projects in the UK and overseas. They support planning and environmental permit applications for a wide range of developments, including quarries, landfills and residential developments. We also have a team of hydrogeologists based from our Truro office who work on the international mining and overseas projects. So our 20-strong landscape team are fully registered with the Landscape Institute, delivering projects across all major sectors. This picture here is one of our most notable projects that we've worked on. It's the Edinburgh Bioquarter. So it's the world-leading centre for life sciences, combining healthcare facilities, teaching buildings, lab facilities and commercial offices, which we started work on in 2016. We were appointed to support the master plan for this project. So mining, so we are, as a fully fledged British international mining consultancy, we have a highly skilled team in Truro, team of engineers who address the needs of the modern mining industry. They've got many years of working around the globe, and some of our clients include Glencore, London Mining, Nordgold, Anglo American. We have a metallurgical and mineral processing test facility in Truro. It's the leading independent laboratory in Europe for testing ores and minerals. With the largest team of mineral surveyors in the UK, we support some of the biggest mineral owners, including the Crown Estate, Northumberland Estate and Forestry Commission. And planning and master planning. So our planning teams are spread across all of our regional offices and have a proven track record in delivering planning permission for a wide variety of projects, including residential, commercial, property, energy and minerals. So that's all of our services, so quite a lot that we do. So what it's like to work for us, we offer mentoring and support from leading technical experts. You have opportunities to work on a variety of projects from start to finish, so you won't just be sort of pigeonholed in one particular area. You really do get to work on a variety of projects. You'll work with many different areas of the business, as you've seen there from all the services that we offer. So this will really help you to develop your skills and knowledge early on in your career. And if you do decide to stay with us long term, then there's really sort of no ceiling on how far you can progress. Our managing director, Keith Mitchell, actually joined us from Leeds University, engineering geologist course, all them years ago, and is obviously now the director of the company. We're very supportive. and proactive in helping people gain their chartership in their field of expertise. And it's something that we do pride ourselves on as a company. Everybody's training plan is individual, and we provide lots of opportunities for internal and external training. Many of our employees have their construction skills certification, and we also have many staff that work on the railways, so they're specifically trained to work on the tracks. So some of the fun bits for working for us, we've got quite a good social interaction at work prior to COVID. And although we're spread across 13 offices, we do work very much as one business. Some of the teams go out for social events. We do things like bowling, and we have huddles where we have pizzas and quizzes on a Friday. We have Christmas nights out. We do a lot of charity fundraising, so beach cleanups and sports events, Movember, things like that, step challenges. Our ecologists and ornithologists rally everybody around each year to do the RSP garden bird watch on our lunch times. I've put in there about construction rocks. We also have a lot of musicians actually in Stoke, including our managing director. And for the 3rd year running, Wardell, Armstrong's very own band, has competed against all industry bands in an event called Construction Rocks. And some of the just notable benefits that you would receive from starting with us will be a mobile phone, including personal usage and tariff. You'd get payment for one professional subscription each year, private healthcare with Bupa, critical illness, cycle to work scheme, and flexi time. Like I say, they're just a few of the benefits that you'll get if you join us. So our recruitment process, and a few sort of tips from me. I hope that you probably all will know some sort of direction on where you're going to be going, and what you maybe be specialising in. But if not, obviously, start to research those things now. I've put on there a couple of institutions, because I always think it's quite good to perhaps go to those sites. They have really good careers advice on those sites. These ones I've put on here for ecology, Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management, and the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. Sort of obviously for myself, I work on recruitment, so I really would suggest that you create a LinkedIn profile if you haven't already. This is certainly the future of recruitment. Many companies don't tend to use recruitment agencies like you may think in the past, obviously because it costs the companies money. We're being one of them, so we do all our own recruitment through LinkedIn, and it's all about sort of networking and advertising the jobs on there. So it may be stuff that you've already been told about before from careers people, but certainly start to build your network. I've put my details on there on this slide for you. But yes, as you probably know, networking is really key to how you can build your career. It's very competitive out there now, and you'll be able to hear about job vacancies, promote yourself, get recommended for jobs, as well as, like I say, build your network, build contacts, find out a bit more about working for companies, what it's like to work for certain companies. And join social media groups. There's a lot of social media groups out there now, such as British ecologists and environmental professionals, geology and geologists. So you're connecting with like-minded people, and again, you're getting to know what companies are recruiting and what they're doing, keep up to date with the news and events. And for us, we don't have a specific graduate scheme as such. We recruit throughout the year, and it's all based on sort of business demands. So the best thing for you to do if you are interested in working for us is, like I say, follow us on the social media, LinkedIn specifically. That's where we advertise all our vacancies. Have a look at our website for more information and careers, and also feel free to email me with your CV and your details. That can be kept on file for future positions. I mean, we are recruiting at the moment, but we are recruiting for people who have graduated already in certain areas. So like I say, it's very much based on business needs really. And that's it from me. So I'm going to pass you over to Mike now.
Hi guys, thank you very much for that from Janine. It was good. I hope everybody got some good sort of tips, and especially the social media stuff on how to get yourself out there with regards to getting a career, maybe in our sort of kind of business area. My name, as you said at the beginning, is Michael Proctor. I'm the principal ecologist for the Stoke, like the ecology team. Basically, it's a sub bracket of the environmental planning umbrella. I'm not going to go too much into specifics at the minute. I'm just going to give everybody a bit of a run through of some of the different types of stuff that we do. Yeah, hope you don't go to sleep too much. So this is kind of a bit of spiel. As ecologists, we work with clients to deliver protected species surveys and mitigation to support planning applications and development. So that's a lot of long words that basically says if somebody wants to build somewhere, be it anything from an extension on the house to a whole housing development, a railway, a pipeline, anything kind of like that, where you need to get planning permission from either one or many local planning authorities. We're basically experts that get hired by those guys who basically say, we want to do X, Y, and Z. How do we go about doing that in a way where we make sure we comply with all the relevant legislation? So as Janine mentioned, there's loads of different departments here that all do all different bits, but I'm just specifically in ecology. So part of the main stuff that we look for when we start doing an initial investigation into where somebody is going to be proposing some kind of development is the different types of habitats that are present on like their development site and how that would impact the surroundings. Anything from stuff that's immediately on the site to how that could potentially be, or habitats that are nearby that may be also impacted by the development as well. Say you've got a big area of ancient woodland, obviously you don't want to build a power plant right next to that because it wouldn't do it any favours. The whole point of what we do is we are governed by legislation, basically. So whilst we are employed by the people who are trying to do the development, we have to be totally unbiased in every aspect of the assessments and impact assessments that we undertake, just to make sure all the boxes are ticked, make sure there's no untoward stuff that happens and everything is kind of done by the book. So there's never any sort of net loss of a sort of the natural resource that's present on the site in the form of ecology anyway. And it is, like I mentioned before, it's not just protected species, it is habitats as well. So like if you've got a big block of woodland somewhere, obviously we're not going to say, yeah, it's fine, go in and cut it all down, because that's not doing our job properly. So we have to make sure that everything like that is accounted for. And we do everything from coming in at the very beginning of a project where we can say, somebody proposes a design and we say, well, you could do it that way, but if you changed X, Y, and Z to plant a bit more woodland, make a few new ponds there, that kind of stuff, then obviously that all goes towards the planning permission process. So one of the main things that we look for is habitat improvement, which is, it's kind of backwards in how it sounds. It's a bit of a misnomer. So improvement kind of means improvement in a sense that it's more nutrient rich. And naturally, the normal environment that you would encounter where it's not interfered with is actually quite nutrient low. So as you can see on this, it's only a pretty simplistic diagram. At the top, that we would say that's very unimproved, where the farming and agricultural practices there aren't too intense. You can see as you move down, the field sizes are increased. Some of the hedgerows are removed, the water course is straightened out. The sort of variation in habitats is reduced quite considerably, and you can see just from the respective little cartoon pictures that are there, that's kind of an indication of the increased level of improvement would decrease biodiversity. This is a thing as we kind of look at a lot of where we do sort of our assessments, a lot of it is already agricultural land. So whilst it might look like a big green field looks nice, with regards to its actual sort of value as a habitat for the vast majority of species, it's not great. But we would always recommend stuff like maintaining hedgerows, trying to renaturalise water courses so they aren't like canals or straight lines. There are some habitats that benefit from sort of the increasing pressures from agricultural practices, like a picture of that skylark there, they're like a ground nesting bird that likes being in big open fields and that kind of stuff. So it's not just as straightforward as like more farming is bad. It depends on what's there. We do loads of different protected species surveys to see what might be about and how the proposed design and the development might impact what's already there, and then that's what we produce our impact assessment and reports on. So one of the main things that we do surveys for is bats. There are 17 confirmed breeding species in the UK, but there are loads of other random ones that occasionally get lost from Europe that they don't really breed here. You get like, sometimes you might get the odd pair that have come over on some bad winds in a storm or something like that. Obviously you get that a lot more around coastal areas, and you get it much more down south as well, where it's warmer than up here in sunny Stoke. So all bat species are afforded protection under European and UK legislation. Obviously with the ongoing Brexit situation at the minute, this is all something that's still under review and still changing. But it's still quite a heavily protected sort of group of species. A lot of what bats we would base our assessment on is like was on about the improvement before, the more natural habitat is, the more favourable it is for naturalised species to be present there. A lot of the impacts to habitats at the minute, which are quite heavily impacting bat populations, is the removals of hedgerows and woodland. Bats, they follow, when they navigate around, they follow linear landscape features, so stuff like hedgerows, rivers, woodland edges, anything like that where it's kind of a solid line of habitat. That's what they use to navigate throughout the countryside. So as I mentioned earlier, with the sort of intensification of agriculture, the removal of hedgerows obviously is really bad. So if we were doing an impact assessment, say if there's some houses that a farmer wants to build in his field, if he wants to remove the hedgerows, we would say maybe plant some hedgerows that go around the outside, or change a design to allow a hedgerow to go through the middle. So it still allows a commuting route for any bats that may be present in the area to still navigate through the development without it just sort of becoming just a big area where they've just got no way of navigating through it. The losses of ponds, particularly farm ponds and stuff like that, farm ponds provide like a really rich foraging resource for bats. So any removal or intensification of farming around ponds, obviously increase stuff like pesticides, that kind of thing, decreases the amount of insects and inverts that are present on and around ponds, which is what the vast majority of bats' main food species are. So any sort of pond protection measures we would always push heavily when we're sort of having our back and forth with clients in regard to informing development design and stuff like that. So loss of mature trees and old buildings, they're the main sort of areas of bat roosting habitat. As you can see, that nocturnal, the picture in the middle, poking his head out of a tree roost. So again, we would always, if ever there's going to be an impact to like an old building or a mature tree or anything that has the potential to support a roosting bat, we would have to go in and do different types of surveys. So you would take pictures of it. You can have a license to do endoscoping, where you have like a camera with a light and a stick, and you go in the hole, see if there's anything roosting inside, just so we can inform as like part of your planning permission to say like, yes, whilst this tree has got potential to support roosting bats, bat roosts are also protected as well as the actual species themselves. So we don't want to cut any trees down which would result in the loss of a bat roost or any bats that may be within it at the time. Yeah, so as I've again mentioned before about the intensification of agriculture, that's a pretty big one for the vast majority of species we survey for. When you have a big field of crops, the sort of the amount of insects and inverts that they can support is really quite low, because it's not a natural environment, so there's not much in the way of a food source for any bats there. They would follow around hedgerows and stuff like that you get around the edge of fields, but with regards to the actual humongous fields themselves, they're very, very low quality habitat for foraging bats. If you have pastoral farmland, which is sort of rearing animals as opposed to growing crops, that is slightly better. It's still very improved, because obviously with the defecation of animals, that's like a lot of nutrients that goes back into the soil. But there's a few different species of dung beetle which are quite important food sources for some of the rarer species of bats, like the horseshoe species, the Rhinolophus genus. Yeah, so it's again a bit better, but still all these different factors have to be considered when we're doing our initial assessment and impact assessments. So these are just some other examples of what I mean by a potential bat roost. So these are endoscope pictures of, you got, so in the left hand column you got just a picture of a tree with a bit of a hole in it. Some of the ones, like the one at the bottom left, you can see there's quite a bit of staining and stuff like that, which is urine runoff from the hole. So that's kind of a bit of an obvious, if you saw a hole like that, you'd be like, yeah, something's definitely living in there. But you can see, and then the second column, the one at the top in the middle, that's you can see there's all scratch marks and claw marks around it where the bats have crawled out, and it's smoothed the edges off quite nicely where they've peeled the bark off. And then the final column on the right, that's just some pictures from endoscopes where people have poked an endoscope in, and that's what they found. That's from the description along the bottom. At the top, that is a natterer's bat. In the centre, that is a group of noctules, but this group is actually sort of below the entrance of the hole, not above it. So you would think a lot of the time a bat would fly into a hole and then crawl up the tree inside. Sometimes it can fly into a hole and crawl down the tree as well. And then the bottom one is a roost of brown long-eared bats. So this is the big one that grabs the most headlines and people get up in arms about the most. This is great crested newt, also a European protected species. You have to have a licence administered by Natural England in order to handle these or survey them. Excuse me. So I'm just having a drink, dying. Yeah, so once again, as I've said already, the intensification of farmland is not great for the majority of natural species that are present in the UK. Pond loss is a big one. Newts are amphibians. A lot of people think they live in the water all the time. They don't. They're actually terrestrial for the majority of the year, but in the breeding season, which is spring, kind of sort of like March to June time, that's when they then move away from the terrestrial habitats, go into the water for breeding, and they lay their eggs in the water. And then once they've done all that, they will then leave the ponds, allow the young to sort of fend for themselves, and then head off back into the terrestrial habitats where they'd be living like under hedgerows, in sort of piles of rocks, bricks, under tree roots and in woodlands, that kind of stuff. Anywhere they can get down into cracks under the ground, basically. So you can see from that picture on the left, that is a male great crested newt in full breeding character. So you can see the crest obviously all down his back, that is where they get the name from. You can tell it's a male because the tail is quite large, and you can see there's the big white stripe down the middle of it. The females don't have that big white stripe. And the picture on the right, that is a mitigation site that we at Wardell Armstrong have basically seen through from the start to the end, where we did the initial habitat assessment, the population size class assessments for a development, and then we found out where all the newts were, and we built them then this group of 9 ponds. And then there's sort of 3 little scrapes, which are the little straight lines in the middle as well, to give them plenty of breeding habitat. And this was all surrounded on 2 sides by sort of newt-proof fencing to prevent them from getting back into where all the development was going on. But we left one side open so they could then naturally disperse into the wider countryside. We've been doing monitoring on that site, particularly for a number of years now, and it's working really well, which is good. This picture, it looks like it was taken in summer. The pond levels look a bit low, but they normally look a lot better than that. And finally, on the last point, great crested newts have got semi-permeable skin, which means they're very, very susceptible to any chemical changes in the environment. So as again, pesticides and manure heat runoff from agriculture and stuff like that. But even whilst over winter, newts hibernate, so they don't really roam around too much, which is when you would get salted roads. Anything that, say there's we have a cold spell in spring and we have to put grit down, that's really bad for newts. It stops them crossing roads and stuff like that, because it dries them out. All the solutes get absorbed into the skin, and it does not do them any favours. And it's all stuff like this when we're, say, designing or helping to design a master plan for a proposed development. That would all go into it. So say there's going to be somebody wants to put a big road next to a pond where we know there's loads of newts, we would then say, well, it might be worth trying to redesign this, put the road further away, try and make it go around the pond, just as another thing to reduce the impact on the newts that are already present there. So another set of surveys that we do is for reptiles. There are 6 different, there was 6, sorry, now recently 7 protected species of reptile in the UK. People think we don't have snakes or anything like that, because the UK, most animals seem kind of boring for the majority of the time. But no, we do. And then we've got some male adders doing the dance there on the bottom left. This is where the kind of two males will compete for a female by the sort of wrap each other around each other and try and push the other one into the ground. I've never seen it happen, but if you YouTube male adders dancing, you get loads of videos of them doing it. It's quite interesting to watch. But yeah, it's quite a rare thing to actually see sort of in the wild. So reptiles sort of, again, the majority of UK habitats are kind of quite uniform in character across it. So you generally have grasslands, sort of hedgerows and woodland occupies a large percentage of the countryside, and then you get big open expanses of moorland and stuff like that, but they're generally sort of a bit different. So any loss of those kind of habitats, we would obviously always try and minimise in a master plan design to try and minimise any impact on reptiles. The grass snakes, as mentioned there in the last point, they are like riparian, basically means sort of water's edge, for want of an easier description. So we would always try and minimise loss of ponds and water courses in a development as well. Or if we can't reduce say something has to be built where is the only place it can be built and it involves losing a water course, we would then recommend as mitigation for that, sort of rebuilding another water course somewhere else in the site to replace any good habitat that was lost. So this is a ridiculously adorable one. These are hazel dormice. They are also a European protected species. These occupy, they have like a really low population density when they occupy an area. So whilst you might have a really big area of ancient woodland, for example, even a small loss of that could have, whilst you might only lose, say for example, habitat for 1 or 2 dormice, if you've only got 10 dormice in the area, that's like a 20% reduction. So it's whilst the actual numbers are so low, that means each one is individually more important than you would expect when you compare to other things, say like where newts, where you can get thousands of them living in a few square miles, for example. So these are also particularly susceptible to habitat fragmentation. So they're arboreal creatures, which means they try and basically stay in hedgerows and tree lines and stuff like that as much as possible, and very rarely go down to the ground where they don't have to. So say you've got 2 big blocks of woodland and they're sort of connected by like a network of hedgerows. If say there's a road or something goes in that might sever the hedgerows between the 2 woodland blocks, they then become 2 isolated sections of habitat, and sort of cumulative habitats, like greater than the sum of their parts. The 2 halves is not as good as 1 whole, if that makes sense. So the 2 sort of linked blocks of woodland might be enough to support a population of dormice, but then the 2 halves may not be individually each large enough to support sort of the same size half, if that makes sense. So another thing where these can be impacted, again, kind of relate to hedgerows, is poor land management regimes. So if ever you want to do hedgerow cutting or something like that, if you're a landowner, you have to make sure you do it at the right times of year when they're not like out foraging or anything like that. So you can minimise the impact on what they're going to do. So these are my favourite protected species, badgers. They're dead good. Look at them. So these have their own Protection of Badgers Act. The majority of UK protected species and habitats is under the 1981 Wildlife and Conservation Act, but badgers are a little bit different. These have their own Protection of Badgers Act, where it not only protects them, but it also protects the sets that they occupy as well. So that's to prevent stuff like badger baiting and people sending dogs down it and all that horrible stuff. Badgers are really prevalent throughout the vast majority of the country, really. Any impacts to hedgerows and woodland, they like sort of digging sets into sort of root bundles and that kind of stuff to add a bit more structural rigidity to the tunnels that they dig. So say somebody wants to build something and a hedgerow's got to come out, we would have to go do a survey all around the whole area to make sure there's no badger sets that would be impacted, say by pulling the hedgerow out, and if the roots could cause a tunnel to collapse, that kind of thing. The main food source that badgers eat is worms and stuff like that. They are omnivorous, so they do eat some bits of fruits and berries and stuff like that, but worms is the main one. So when we would do, if we had a big site, for example, and there was multiple different badger clans on the same site, you can do what's called a bait marking study, where you put different coloured bait down at the sets, basically, for each clan, and then you go, once you've done it for a couple of weeks, you then go down and do like a big walkover of your whole site, and look for badger latrines, which is like sort of territorial feces markers that they put down, and then they will be different colours, which you can then plot on a map so you can see what territories each different clan occupies. So say you need to mitigate for one set that's been lost, you don't want to try and relocate the set into an area that's occupied by another clan. You want to make sure it's still within the sort of the target clan's home range, as opposed to moving it to somewhere else, because you increase stuff like territorial fighting and stuff like that, and you know, that's not good mitigation. So nesting birds. All wild native nesting birds are protected specifically whilst nesting against destruction and stuff like that. So if you walk past a hedgerow and there's a bird nest in it and the bird flies off, like, you haven't broke the law, because that would be mental. But any sort of negligent or intentional impact to a nest that's currently where there's on eggs, or the eggs have fledged and stuff like that, that's protected under law as well. It's illegal to do. There are loads of different types of birds in the UK. I'm not an ornithologist, unfortunately, so I can't go reeling off many names, but the ornithology in itself is like its own humongous area of study. There's different bird species which have more sort of Catholic habitat preferences, like sort of residential areas and that kind of stuff. They're a bit more adapted to sort of naturalized gardens and that kind of thing, whereas you get other bird species which prefer sort of big woodlands and they're not roosting high up in trees and stuff like that. And other sort of bird species which can be seed eaters, so they really like being in like mature hedgerows and mature trees, that kind of stuff. So this is as we're coming up to this time of year now, nesting birds are starting to become more of an issue as we're getting into spring. Nesting bird season sort of, it's always a bit of a bone of contention, but people say it starts around March-ish and ends around sort of August, September-ish. Because obviously the birds don't wake up on the 1st of March and go, well, it's breeding season now, let's go build a nest. But we are sort of getting into that sort of time of year now, which it can start being quite difficult for developers to sort of accommodate, because if there is an active nest, there is nothing you can do about it until it is finished. There's like a couple of years ago, we were working on a job which was the renovation of a barn, and there was sort of a colony of sparrows that had taken up nesting in the walls, and we went back for on a weekly basis and monitored it, and the sort of first clutch of eggs sort of fledged and hatched and left, and then they laid another one. So we ended up delaying the project by about 4 months, I think it was, in the end, because there was some sparrows in the wall. But it just is what it is. Sometimes you can't help it. It's good to protect nature where you can, and yeah, it's just a bit of a novel example. It's not normally quite that bad. So otter and water voles, these are sort of the main riparian species that we would look at when we do any protected species surveys, stuff like that, to say you've got any sort of big fishing lakes that might be on or near your site, to be good to check out for otter. Any sort of small brooks, rivers and that kind of thing is good for water vole. They both sort of dig burrows in the sides, like an otter holt is what it's called, and then you just get a water vole burrow. You can look for sort of the evidence of these protected species on your site. You would look for footprints, like sort of in the edges of watercourses, that kind of stuff. Water vole have quite a characteristic thing they leave behind called a feeding station, whereas you can see that one there on the right, it's just like eating like a bit of some aquatic vegetation. And when they eat it, it leaves like a 45-degree line at the end. So they kind of all look a bit like spears, like a bit pointy at the end, and they leave little bundles of these sticks about after they've eaten them. So you can obviously, if there's a little bundle of these sticks that they've left behind, whilst you've not seen a water vole, that's evidence of them being present in the area. Again, anything that involves the intensification of agriculture, you get increased pollution and stuff like that, which often just runs straight into watercourses as farmland drainage measures, which is never any good. Sometimes, whilst farmers and stuff like that might try to maintain the level of like sort of natural progression in a ditch, they sometimes need to do sort of remediation measures like dredging it, getting the silt out and stuff like that, to make sure the ditch, whilst they're trying to keep it good for wildlife, remains functional as a ditch for the actual farming purposes as well. So for stuff like that, we would advise them sort of when to do it, which areas to avoid when. We can maybe go through, do some phased vegetation clearance first under supervision to make sure there's nothing there that would be hurt by those measures as they're going through. So it is not just protected species that we look at. There are lots of different protected habitats around the country as well in the UK, all of which are home to different sort of levels of species and biomes based on the kind of habitats that are there. Obviously, in like sort of big open plains like the one on the left, you would get stuff like skylark I mentioned before, like ground nesting birds. And then in like the ancient woodland and stuff like that, you would where you get your bigger, taller trees, you could get stuff like red kites, that kind of thing, like big raptor birds. And each of these, whilst they can support a protected species in themselves, they are also protected within their own right as an important habitat. So those just the list along the top is just some of the examples of the things that we would look for when we go to a site to do a habitat survey, which is based on sort of the vegetation communities that are based on there. Which, if something like that, if it would be impacted, if you were building somewhere, you would have to redesign your master plan to replace any amount that was lost. So we're getting just towards the end now. This is just a list of some potential eco-friendly jobs that are not necessarily what I do, but stuff that's similar. So you could be an arboriculturist or work with trees. We have an arboriculture department here where they go out and do tree specific surveys. So kind of the character of the tree, if it's grown in a way that is common of the tree or not, if it's likely to fail. So that's like a health and safety thing, anything like that, which you can do in a consultancy basis like I do, or you can work for like a nurseries, forestry commission, local government as a tree planning officer, that kind of stuff. And then you get UK-wide and county wildlife trusts as well, like the Staff's Wildlife Trust, and other things like the Staff's Mammal Group, Staff's Bat Group, all of the stuff like that, where they always have to volunteers and or permanent staff to help with the countryside management stuff. Then there is consultancy, which is what I do, where we're basically paid by a client to say, I want to go do this, what do I have to do to make it all right, basically. It's a very, very brief summary of what it is. It can get quite complicated sometimes, but it's good. Every day is a challenge. Yeah, it's good. I enjoy it. Then you have council county ecologists. So basically, when we have been employed by somebody to produce a report based on what may or may not be on the site, we then submit that to the local council on their behalf. And then there would be a county or council ecologist who then reviews our findings, inspects our methods and our data, and then sort of critically appraises our sort of impact assessment and what our mitigation proposals are. So they basically give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down if what we've suggested is enough, or what we would potentially need to do more. We're pretty good at getting the nail on the head with what we need to do. It's obviously difficult because we're employed by somebody to tell them what they basically need to do to get their development planning permission. So we don't want to say, oh, plant 100 miles of ancient woodland, because as much as we'd love to tell everybody to do that, we can't, because they would just say no. So this is where the whole being totally unbiased thing comes in. We have to sort of assess what the needs of the county ecologist might be and what they sort of might particularly want to be pushing. Say there's, like I know there's a local development that's not too far from here where the council ecologist is pushing to get developers in a particular area to get sort of a network of limestone grassland to try and encourage the sort of prevalence of that habitat in the area. So if we, for example, it's good having the local knowledge, we could say, oh, we know this site is going to be over here, we know the council ecologist already, and they'll probably want us to do something of this grassland stuff. So instead of submitting it for review and getting it back saying you need to do this, we can then say we already know that they're going to want this, and you can sort of try and smooth the process through by sort of having that local knowledge. And as you guys are all at uni, any research and development into further study areas, there's a casual ecologist who worked here for a couple of years. I think she's now gone off to staff, sorry, not at Keele, doing a PhD in terrestrial toxicology in intensification of agriculture or something like that. I think it's lots of long words I don't understand. It's basically looking at the impact of microplastics, I believe, in sort of the terrestrial agricultural environment. Which obviously at the minute that's kind of further study and there's no sort of wildlife legislation surrounding that particular area, but obviously the science base is always growing, the knowledge base is always pushing forward to find the newer and better way to do things, so stuff like that's really important. There's park rangers and park management teams, so you can basically be employed to go knocking about, make sure any parks are well maintained. Sometimes you can do stuff like hedgerow planting or hedgerow removal, maybe to try and sort of diversify the habitats if you want to increase, say, an area of grassland. And stuff like that. And then biological or ecological record centres. So this is when you, as part of what you would do for your planning permission requirements, there's kind of like record centres where you can say, there is a proposed development to go here, and then you give them, say, the line boundary of where they want to build, and say you request any sort of local notable wildlife records. And so these are present in every county all across the country. So if someone who happens to be sort of like a fan of nature is walking around and say, oh, I've seen a red kite fly past, and they know from their own knowledge that's notable for the area, they can ring the local record centre and be like, yeah, I've just seen this red kite, and that then goes on record. So if anybody then goes to develop anywhere near where that record was taken, that's come back and they say, oh, this is something that we also need to account for, because you may not necessarily see that particular red kite when you're doing your survey, but somebody else knows that they're already present in the area. So it's all different sort of bases of information that are used to inform our impact assessments. And then the last point, there's governing bodies and professional associations. So Natural England, they basically the UK governing body on environmental legislation. So they administer and approve stuff like Great Crested Newt licenses, anything like that. If there's a big contentious development goes up, Natural England is sometimes asked directly to comment ahead of when the planning permission goes in, to say, to try and smooth it over. What can we do in advance of you commenting, so we can design it into the master plan at an early stage? And then the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management. I'm not chartered yet, but I'm a member of that institute, which basically has our own sort of code of conduct that we have to adhere to when we are doing our job. And then the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment is quite similar, but just a slightly different vein of impact assessment. Thank you very much for listening, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. And yeah, any questions, please fire away. Thank you very much.
Right. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Michael and Janine. I've got a bit of feedback, sorry. So I've got some questions. Is there a way to answer those?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first one, is there a minimum degree classification requirement for the geological and environmental jobs?
I think with regards to ecology, it probably varies by company. I think I've seen some roles where they've required like a 2-2. I think at Wardell, Armstrong, I think they require a 2-1. Yeah, I think it sort of depends on the role and where it is that you go.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Next one. Is the job as an ecologist, in your case, so this is for you, Michael, mostly office-based or field-based, or is it an even split?
It sort of changes as you go sort of up the ranks, really. So I've been doing this for 6 years now. I'm principal ecologist. For the first sort of 5 years, it was very, very, very heavily site-based. You still have to write up your reports and that, so it's a bit of a mix. But as you start as a junior or a graduate, you kind of sort of maybe 70% site work, 30% office, and then as you kind of move up and you start getting towards management tiers and stuff like that, it becomes more office-based and less site-based. So I'm probably 20% site-based and now about 80% office-based.
Great, thank you. And just staying on ecologists, career progressions, are there good career progressions?
Again, I think that kind of varies in the company where you work for. There's some places which aren't great for it, but I mean obviously I'm biased in this case because I've worked for Wardell Armstrong, but they're really good here. I've only been here for 6 years, but just over, and I'm now principal ecologist, which is rapid career progression, I believe, anyway. But yeah, it's company specific. I think there's a lot of places where other consultants, as you hear, people have sort of been working there and are sort of a bit frustrated with the lack of progress. But here at Wardell Armstrong, they push you to progress faster, if you know what I mean.
Right, thank you. And one for Janine. So you, what kind of individuals? I know this is a very open question for you, but what kind of individuals do Wardell Armstrong seek to hire? So are there sort of any sort of like skills
No, I would say that we're a very people orientated type of company. So obviously you would need your degree, to come for certain. Well, most of our positions will require a degree, but in terms of the person, there isn't any really specific skills. We do quite informal sort of interviews. It's more of a chat. It's get to know you. It's to see how you fit with the business. It's how you fit with certain teams. Yeah, it's just about having somebody who can fit with us on a personal level as well. So I wouldn't say that there's anything specific. Just be yourself and try and be calm and interested in what you do. What your subject is, and show that interest and show that you want to be a bit flexible and things like that. Those probably are some skills we look for. Somebody who's a bit flexible, and who can adapt to different situations, because we do work on such a variety of projects. We do need to have the people who are able to do that, really. So yeah, I hope that's answered it.
Okay, thanks. And staying on that, students actually wrote in and said, obviously in the current situation, there's a lack of work experience opportunities this past year. So many students may not have been able to get sort of work experience, in the field, on the ground, so to speak. Is there anything that you can recommend as a kind of alternative? And is work experience essential when you're applying for future jobs with your specific company?
Yeah, it's definitely been a really difficult time, hasn't it, with COVID and such, because obviously we would recommend you get as much work experience as you can, but we do recognise that, as I know many companies do. So it would be taken into consideration, obviously, that you've been through this difficult time. So if you were applying for a graduate position, we don't always necessarily need to have people with experience. Again, it's about showing your interest and your passion for what you're doing. We take on fresh graduates, so that they don't always have experience. Obviously, sometimes people who've got experience not always necessarily the right person, or they may be expecting more money because they've got that experience. So it certainly shouldn't put you off applying for positions, and shouldn't. Like I say, I know a lot of companies are going to know and understand that this time has been difficult, and unfortunately I'm not sure what I can recommend for you to get that experience, because we are having to turn people away because a lot of our staff are working from home, so we can't offer those placement opportunities. We would normally offer some work experience and things, but it's just we can't offer that at the moment because people are working from home. We haven't got that resource that we would, and the support that we can give them. And I imagine, again, that a lot of companies are the same. So I think it's just trying to wait for things to get better and then push on to try and get some experience then, once we're over this bit of a hurdle, really. But just try not to let it put you off, really, because we'll understand that you haven't been able to get that experience.
Okay, whilst you're there, Janine, just another quick question. Do most of the roles require a driving licence?
Yes, they do, but then again, we understand that if you come to us and you don't drive yet, we have a bit of a period of 6 months where we'd expect you to get that in that time. So it would be a bit of a clause in the contract to say that we need you to get that within the probationary period, because there is other options initially when you do start, that you can go with other people, because obviously you'll be training, you won't necessarily be going on your own anyway. So we offer that sort of leeway that first period, because obviously we know that people can't necessarily afford straight away to get a car and things like that. So as long as you've committed to doing that within that first 6 months, then that's fine.
Okay, we are running out of time, but I'll just, if you're okay, just to answer another sort of couple of questions. Yeah. So somebody's asked if somebody's done a master's or a PhD before they apply to Wardell Armstrong, are they at a more of an advantage, would you say, than somebody who's done maybe just finished at an undergraduate degree?
I mean, I think maybe Mark, you can answer as well, but I think it sort of depends on the area that you're applying for. Certain particular areas, sectors would prefer a master's, but then again, we do take people without that. So yeah, don't know what do you think, Mike? Would you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so in ecology, having a master's would benefit. Obviously, it's any relevant experience would obviously be much more favourable. So, like, we've had people apply to be like a junior ecologist before, and they've had a PhD in like the migratory pattern of some like Australian bird. And whilst it's awesome they've got a PhD, that's not really relevant to what we do. So, any further qualification or experience in a relevant area is definitely considered and would be an advantage. But it has to be specifically relevant, basically.
Okay, that's brilliant. There's a couple more questions, but I'm conscious we're running out of time. There's another session starting at 3 that some people might want to be going into. Is there any way, not to put you on the spot, but if students feel they haven't got, they've got questions, they think about the talk after, can they drop you a line or?
Yeah, definitely. My email's on the presentation if somebody got that down, but you can definitely on the website. I think my contact details are on there, so I certainly don't mind you contacting me. I'm sure you don't mind, do you?
No, not at all. Yeah, I think my web email's probably on the website, but if not, anything specifically ecology related, just email it to Janine and she can forward it to me, and I'll respond when I can.
Okay, that's brilliant. Just in case anyone thinks that, the questions haven't been answered. But thank you so much. That was really interesting. I feel I've learned a lot about newts, bats, and badgers today as well. So thanks a lot.
Badgers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you very much.